A 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4. That standard way of counting in music is a whole beat metronome practice. The first part is whole beat, 1, 2. And the second part is single beat, a 1, 2, 3, 4. Those two traditions have existed together for a while, but universally accepted and erroneous performance practice in classical music says composers always intended the faster speed. That needs to change, but you cannot mention this in some circles, up to and possibly including your conservatory applied instrument instructor. You will be laughed out of the room. But that's okay. I'm not talking to those people. I don't believe they have the imagination to hear music in a new way. They say it's plotting and thinks it makes them smart to say that. I'm talking to the learners, the players who will develop injuries from pursuing unmusical and impracticable speeds, the performers who will spend years in a degree program chasing clicks with 10 pieces instead of learning hundreds of pieces and how to improvise, create, or transpose. We wonder why people don't like classical music. We shouldn't wonder. People don't have time to hear it because it's being played too fast. It's not that listeners don't understand it, it's because performers don't understand it. But they keep breaking themselves, driven by the desire to play a few clicks faster because they think that's the only way to interpret that metronome mark. There's no bandwidth left to give space for other ideas about how to be musically expressive. It shouldn't be about slow or fast. It should be about musical content and expression. But it just so happens that those things are obliterated when people are trying for single beat speeds. Modern performances don't reward your musical intelligence and imagination. They depend on your ignorance. You're supposed to clap in amazement because it's fast. But don't ask questions. Were you moved? It doesn't matter. Clap anyway because the people next to you are clapping. In music, nothing is anything unless it's two things. A single pitch isn't music. Neither is a single metronome tick. It makes perfect sense that composers count two ticks as one thing. 1, 2, 1, 2. It's a macro beat. The individual swing in one direction is a microbeat. This also underscores the problem with counting that's present in the earliest lessons in classes for very young music students. When numbers are used, misinterpretations will happen. Rhythm isn't numbers. It's coordinated movement with macrobeats, microbeats, and pattern vocabulary. One cannot misinterpret one's own movement with music. But teachers continue to drive students to single beat speeds that are often literally impossible. And if anybody points out that the emperor has no clothes, I mean that performers are breaking themselves pursuing something that nobody asked for or wants. The response is always to point them to some kind of text that they believe irrefutably supports a single beat performance. But my thing is, if you saw a text from 200 years ago claiming that people jumped 9 feet high, you'd question that, right? You would know that there's some piece of the puzzle you're missing. Pointing to a text and then telling people they only like whole beat because they suck and didn't practice enough is not an appropriate response. And yes, this happens. Sure, there are some historical writings that appear to suggest single beat. There are also some that suggest whole beat. Any meaningful response has to include the most important text, the music itself, playing or singing. It's just too easy to say whole beat is too slow without providing your own musical example of why, to your ears, single beat is right. I don't mean to disparage anybody trying to play fast, but my feeds are full of people making apologetic attempts, and I find that heartbreaking. This music wasn't written for people to limp through. It was written to be moving. Please, for the sake of music and for your own well-being, learn to be at peace with whole beat performances. There's so much richness in this repertoire that cannot be appreciated the way the composer intended if you don't slow down. Does 4 years in music school learning 15 pieces at single beat and leaving with tendinitis make any kind of sense? Okay, so this is the morning after I recorded that little rant yesterday, and I just have a couple of things I want to add, because the next videos I publish on this channel starting next week are going to be focused on audiation. So I want to say this one last piece. about WBMP before I move on to other topics and hopefully, put a nail in this coffin. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and put a performance here. And the piece I'm playing is Chopin's Étude, Opus 10, number 1 in C major. This is something I've been working on for a few weeks. I actually had some lessons on it 6 or 7 years ago, but recently decided to revisit it. This performance I'm going to share is around 66 BPM, 66 beats per minute. The metronome mark in my Henley edition says quarter note equals 176. So if you do the math, you'll notice I'm at 75% of the whole beat speed. And that's where it is right now. I have no doubt that soon I'll be comfortable at the whole beat tempo, but that's actually what I want to talk about. First of all, I don't know what kind of person would listen to this performance and think, oh, it's all right, it just needs to be 150% faster. That is 250% of this speed that I'm playing, because that would be the single beat speed. At this speed, 3/4 of whole beat, Chopin's musical intentions are pretty clear. It's a study on broad arpeggios for right hand sweeping up and down the entire keyboard. Like that. This was a new idea in piano repertoire when Chopin wrote it. And the whole beat tempo makes perfect sense in that context. It was something new. He didn't need the new idea and velocity. The new idea was enough in and of itself. Anybody who says this is too easy at a whole beat tempo is lying. They are lying, and they do say that. Just yesterday, I got a comment on another platform that said, and I quote, "Whole beat theorists are just pianists frustrated at their own technical limitations." And that's something that really needs to be addressed head on, because it's based on this piano hero ethos that's really got our culture in a stranglehold. Because we're not talking about music anymore, we're talking about egos. I do think there were piano heroes 200 years ago, but they weren't Chopin. They were Alkan and Kalkbrenner. And I don't think it's impossible for some performers to play the piece you're about to hear at single beat tempos. Some can. You can find them on YouTube. But if you listen to them and then listen to what I'm about to play, you can make your own decisions about what you hear. I think I summed it up pretty well in my clickbait video when I said, the more we approach the warp speed of a single beat interpretation, the less the performance is about the music. The more it's about the performer. Speed becomes a one-dimensional obsession, but fast is not an interpretation. When the speed of transmission is valued more, the quality and content of the message is valued less. There's also the little matter of 19th century sources who said they heard performers playing this music twice as fast as the metronome mark. Think about that for a minute. If you're thinking of a whole beat performance like you're about to hear, that tracks perfectly. There are indeed musicians who can play it twice as fast. But if you were thinking a single beat was Chopin's intention, alarm bells should be going off in your brain, because even you need to acknowledge that 2 times single beat is simply not anywhere in the realm of human possibility. If you do the math, it's about 433% faster than what you're about to hear. And even if humans could do it, you'd have to ask yourself, why would they do it? Which is the question I'm always asking myself about why go from whole beat to single beat, even though I very much have experience performing in the single beat tradition. But I don't do it anymore. I thought about putting in a few extra practice hours to get this performance up to full whole beat speed instead of 3/4 of whole beat. Then I thought, that doesn't serve my point. That's about my ego. Rushing the learning process is how performers hurt themselves. I know how I learn, and I'm looking forward to playing it at quarter note 88 in a month or so when I have time to get around to it. One other thing is, this piece is clearly based on Bach's Prelude in C major, which Chopin was very familiar with. That's this one. And that sort of gives the lie to single beaters who say whole beat sounds plodding. When you listen to my performance, I think you'll be able to hear the line from Bach's Prelude to the Étude. But nobody in their right mind would suggest that Bach's Prelude would be better 433% faster, or even 150% faster. It's just that people are used to hearing the Chopin played super fast. That's all this is. It's preference, which is based on familiarity. When you're familiar with single beat interpretations, you gotta adjust to whole beat interpretations. But remember, when Chopin was writing, this music was brand new. They didn't have a lifetime of single beat interpretations of it, making them think that that's the only acceptable interpretation. And for the record, playing slow is just as hard as playing fast, because the wrong notes last longer. I'm serious, try it. If you're interested in learning this repertoire, do not be deterred by people who make this about ego, like the person I quoted earlier. They just don't know any better. And I guarantee you that if single beat was Chopin's intention, they're frustrated with their own technical limitations. Maybe they should deal with that instead of trying to throw shade. Seriously, if you're showing up to this party to tell whole beat practitioners they're wrong and limited, then show up with your own performance. Words miss the point. This music wasn't written for people to compete with. Although because of single beat performance practice, it's become that. It's an étude. It was written to help you learn. Technical limitations aren't something to be afraid of. We all have them. But you don't fix those with a metronome. You fix them with learning new ways to move. And Chopin's whole beat tempos result in movement that feels good. But I played single beat before. I got my degrees. Conservatories are literally full of performers trying to find their way from whole beat to single beat. It's time to question that. Most won't succeed, because for many pieces, single beat is literally impossible. I'm talking 0 people can play them. I get that composers sometimes write for the highest echelons of performers, but I think we've largely forgotten that sometimes they just write for you. There's a reason whole beat speeds feel comfortable. It's because they're musical. And I'll reiterate that whole beat speeds are not easy. That's why the performance you're about to hear is 3/4 whole beat. Chopin was a nuanced performer and an inventive composer. His intention was not a battlefield strewn with the limp hands of damaged musicians. And that's what we have now. Don't let that happen to you. So I hope you enjoy this plodding performance. It's actually not plodding at all, but some people will say it is. I've got some really cool videos on audiation in the pipeline, so if you're not subscribed, go ahead and fix that and ring the notification bell so you see those videos when they start dropping next week. Remember, the haters are the herders. And you have to really hate music to wish this piece was going to be over in 1.5 minutes instead of 4. Enjoy the chords, enjoy the bass line, enjoy the tone. Maybe I'll post it when I have a full whole beat performance. Maybe I won't. I got nothing to prove, and neither do you. I wish I could do it today, because I just got the piano tuned and these big chords would sound amazing. But that's okay. It'll happen in its own time.